On February 1, 2026, Cher stands under the searing neon of the Crypto.com arena, accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award that feels less like a trophy and more like a surrender from an industry that spent 60 years trying to kill her career. She holds the room in a silence so thick you can hear the ghosts of 1960s folk pop and 1990s Eurodance colliding. But the real truth isn't found in the standing ovation. It's buried in the data of 7 consecutive decades of Billboard #1s, a feat shared only by the Rolling Stones. How does a girl from a Scranton orphanage, who once wore rubber bands to keep the soles on her shoes, become the only human to outlast every musical hegemony of the 20th century? What is the hidden price of being a rich man in a world designed to keep you an employee? The narrative of Cher often begins with a mohair suit and a meeting with Sonny Bono, but the true 0 point is much darker and far more systemic. In 1946, El Centro, California, was not the birthplace of a star, but the setting for a Steinbeckian saga of grim endurance. Sherilyn Sarkisian was born into a fractured architecture. A father, John Sarkisian, whose gambling and substance struggles rendered him a phantom, and a mother, Georgia Holt, who was only 20 years old and struggling against the crushing weight of post-war poverty. The defining trauma, the moment the bumper car philosophy was forged, occurred when Cher was an infant. Her parents, destitute in Scranton, Pennsylvania, temporarily boarded her in a Catholic orphanage. Holt could only visit once a week, forced to view her crying child through a glass window, a visual metaphor for the distance Cher would maintain from the world for decades. As detailed in Cher, the memoir, Part 1, 2024 by Cher, this period created a lifelong fear of abandonment and a split personality that was simultaneously savvy and naive. By the time she was in grade school, she was navigating undiagnosed dyslexia, an educational failure that made her feel like a loser before she ever reached the Sunset Strip. This wasn't a childhood. It was a training ground for a woman who would later view the entire entertainment industry as a series of walls to be hit and navigated. The silence of that orphanage window would eventually be replaced by the loudest wall of sound in music history. By 1962, 16-year-old Cher had fled to Los Angeles, dancing in nightclubs along the Sunset Strip to survive. It was here she encountered Salvatore "Sonny" Bono, an 11-year-old senior associate of the legendary and notoriously volatile producer Phil Spector. The industry likes to frame this as a romance, but the investigative reality is that it was a professional apprenticeship under the most intense sonic laboratory of the era, Spector, Wall of Sound. Cher began as a backing vocalist, her powerful, androgynous contralto hidden behind the ronettes and the crystals. Spector's technique was a cacophony of layers, multiple pianos, guitars, and horns blended into a singular, crushing wave of sound. Cher's voice was frequently shunted to the back of the room because its raw power threatened to break the mix. During this era, she was a professional phantom, releasing singles under aliases like Bonnie Jo Mason and Sherilyn, while Sonny performed as Caesar to her Cleo. The real truth of this period is the fabrication of the duo's image as a counterculture icon. In 1965, I Got You Babe sold 3 million copies, positioning them as the folk rock it couple, yet Cher was functionally a bystander in her own branding. She was Sonny, pal, a teenager propelled into global fame by a man who had tried and failed to be an artist himself, and saw in her the perfect vessel for his thwarted ambitions. But as the hits climbed the charts, a secret legal architecture was being built beneath her feet, one that would eventually leave her with not a penny to her name. The most shocking revelation of Cher's career isn't a scandalous affair, but a corporate contract. By the mid-1970s, the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour was a juggernaut, pulling 30 million weekly viewers and making Cher a household name. Yet, as she prepared to divorce Sonny in 1974, the reality of her power structure surfaced. She discovered she was an employee of Cher Enterprises, a company where Sonny held 95% ownership and his lawyer held the remaining 5%. Cher later described this arrangement as a state of involuntary servitude. She had no power to sign checks, no vote in her career direction, and was contractually forbidden from taking any work without Sonny's express permission. When the partnership imploded, the goddess of pop found herself at a total 0 point. She was living in a 28,000 square foot mansion with a man she was divorcing, occupying opposite ends of the house to maintain the public mirage for CBS. The data of this collapse is stark. Despite being the female artist with the most #1 singles in US history at the time, she emerged from the divorce with nothing but her clothes and her car. This systemic exploitation forced her into the first of her many valleys, a period of financial ruin where she had to beg for a new chance. It was at this moment she realized that in the entertainment oligarchy, talent is merely the product, ownership is the power. Stripped of her money and her partner, Cher turned to a place the industry called the graveyard to resurrect her ghost. In the early 1980s, Las Vegas was not the glitzy residency hub it is today. It was, in Cher's own words, the elephant's graveyard, the final destination for has-beens to play out their remaining days for tourists. This phenomenon aligns perfectly with the academic theory of performativity, as explained by Judith Butler in Gender Trouble. Butler argues that identity is not something a person is, but something one does through the constant repetition of acts. Cher's residency at Caesar's Palace, 1979–1982, was a masterclass in this theory. She wasn't just singing, she was performing the idea of Cher, utilizing Bob Mackey's high-camp costumes as a suit of armor against the industry that had written her off. The data suggests this was a desperate financial move. She was earning $300,000 a week to support her children and pay off debts, all while the Hollywood elite viewed her with a mix of pity and disdain. The paradox of the elephant's graveyard is that by embracing the role of the goddess of pop in the desert, Cher maintained her visibility while the labels that dropped her faded into obscurity. She leaned into the unserious label, using it as a smokescreen to plot her most daring pivot yet, a total abandonment of the musical stage for the silver screen. Hollywood, however, wasn't ready for a variety show star to demand a seat at the table of high art. When Cher moved to New York in 1982 to pursue dramatic acting, she wasn't just fighting for a role. She was fighting a systemic bias against celebrity that still plagues the industry today. The turning point came when director Mike Nichols saw her in a Broadway play and cast her as a lesbian factory worker in Silkwood. The industry reacted with laughter. At the film's premiere, the audience reportedly chuckled when Cher's name appeared in the credits. The laughter died when she received an Academy Award nomination for that role. What followed was a data-backed renaissance: Mask 1985, which won her Best Actress at Cannes, and Moonstruck 1987, which finally secured her the Oscar for Best Actress. This era was characterized by an outright refusal to be counted out, evidenced by her 1986 Mohawk Oscar dress, a 2-foot-tall feathered fuck you to the Academy for snubbing her performance in Mask. Cher's acting style was the antithesis of the variety show. It was vulnerable, raw, and unglamorous. She had successfully navigated the Silkwood to Moonstruck arc 1983–1990, proving that her identity was a construct she could dismantle and rebuild at will. Yet, as she approached the 1990s, her health and the shifting musical landscape would force her back into the laboratory of technological innovation. The woman who conquered the screen was about to become the first digital ghost in the machine. By 1998, Cher's music career was considered microwaved by many. She was 52 years old, an age where female pop stars were traditionally relegated to the oldies circuit. Then came Believe. The track was the first commercial recording to use Antares Auto-Tune not as a corrective tool, but as a deliberate stylistic distortion, a technique now known globally as the Cher effect. The technical data is fascinating. Producers Mark Taylor and Brian Rawling set the retune speed to 0, causing the software to snap the pitch instantly from note to note, removing the natural portamento or slide of the human voice. Warner Bros. Records hated it. They argued it sounded like a robot and demanded she remove the effect. Cher's response, "You can change it over my dead body," is the moment she seized total control of her sonic legacy. The result was a global #1 hit that sold 11 million copies, making her the oldest female solo artist to top the Hot 100. The Believe era, 1998–1999, fundamentally altered the architecture of modern pop, paving the way for artists like T-Pain and Kanye West. Cher had used technology as a shield, turning her agging voice into a futuristic anomaly that couldn't be categorized or dismissed. But as her professional empire reached new heights, the stability of her private dynasty was beginning to fracture under the weight of her own legend. The human side of the Cher myth is defined by the struggle to balance an iconic public persona with the complex realities of motherhood. Her relationship with her children, Chaz Bono and Elijah Blue Allman, has been a central narrative of resilience and controversy. In 2008, Cher became a prominent ally for trans rights during Chaz's transition, candidly discussing the open and loving process required to know the new child. However, late 2023 and early 2024 revealed a darker layer of the family dynamic. Cher filed for a temporary conservatorship over the finances of her son, Elijah Blue Allman, shared with the late Greg Allman. The petition expressed grave concerns that Elijah's struggles with mental health and substance abuse would lead to the reckless spending of his inheritance, potentially endangering his life. The investigative truth of this battle is the tension between protection and autonomy. In January 2024, a judge denied the emergency request, citing Elijah's demonstrated sobriety and his right to manage his own resources. This conflict highlights the paradox of the protector, a mother who fought for her own independence for decades, now finding herself in a legal battle to restrict the independence of her child in the name of survival. Even as her family life faced public scrutiny, Cher was fighting one last legal war to ensure her name would live forever. In late 2025, the final piece of the Cher professional puzzle was settled in a federal courtroom. Since 2021, Cher had been locked in a royalty battle with Mary Bono, the widow of Sonny Bono. The Sonny Bono estate had attempted to use the termination rights of the U.S. Copyright Act to reclaim Cher's 50% share of royalties from the Sonny and Cher hits, effectively trying to erase the 1978 divorce agreement. On November 26, 2025, Judge John A. Kronstadt issued a landmark ruling. State contract law, the 1978 divorce settlement, trumped the federal copyright termination power. The ruling ensured that Cher's 50% royalty split would exist in perpetuity. Furthermore, Cher was awarded over $187,000 in withheld royalties and granted the right to recover more than $1.024 million in legal costs. This legal victory coincided with her 2022 decision to sell her catalog rights to Iconic Artists Group, ensuring that the Cher brand would be managed as a corporate asset long after she leaves the stage. As of early 2026, with an estimated net worth of $360 million, Cher is no longer just an artist. She is a self-sustaining financial ecosystem. Her 2026 Grammy Lifetime Achievement win was the symbolic checkmate in a game she had been playing since the Scranton orphanage. She has successfully built a world where Cher can never truly be terminated. Cher is the ultimate anomaly in the consumer society's drive to convert humans into disposable commodities. She survived the 95-5 ownership split of the 70s, the has-been label of the 80s, and the ageist erasure of the 90s by treating her identity as a series of calculated, high-risk pivots. The real truth of Cher is that she never reinvented herself. She simply refused to die while the world was watching. As she approaches her 80th birthday in May 2026, she remains vocal about her disdain for aging. "I hate it," she says, even as she accepts her place in the pantheon of immortals. Her story is a haunting reminder that in the architecture of fame, the only way to win is to own the ground you stand on. If you wake up tomorrow and the world has changed, just remember, Cher has probably already hit that wall, backed up, and started driving in a different direction. Does an icon ever truly stop working, or does the work simply become the icon?